Lord, take what little faith that we seem to have when things are good, and as you have promised, increase that faith as we lead with it. As we recognize that the circumstances are so different now than they were just 3 months ago, increase the faith that we have so that we can perhaps disciple in new ways, worship in new ways, do outreach in new ways, and respond to the tremendous opportunities that you have put before us. As you lead us through the disruptions, lead us into deeper faith and bring new persons into your kingdom. Guide us in the name of Christ. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thanks so much, Jeff. I think Mark has already pulled us off of Facebook Live, so that component's over. But allow me to put up the PowerPoint, and then we can kind of make the transition over to our time of presentation today. Just to say too, as I provide just a brief introduction for those that are joining us on Zoom, Jeff, I really appreciated your devotion, and there was one phrase that you used there that just really struck a chord for me, and it is that idea of a tragedy from the heart of God if we were to return to in-person worship the very same way that we left. And I think that there are multiple levels at which that is certainly true, certainly as people of faith, because this time has absolutely tested that for each of us. But also too, as people of understanding and insight, because this time has absolutely caused us to rethink and to recalibrate and to reshape our understanding of what ministry is about, and certainly our understanding of what the world is like as we move forward from this, not just as it relates to, what worship experiences look like as we gather together in an in-person format, but also on a variety of levels of life. And, for that, I believe the document that you've created, Discoveries and Learnings from a Global Pandemic, is just very helpful to us to think on a different plane about some of the challenges that we're facing. The phrase that we like to use here is you have the 500-foot level or the 50-foot level, which you're, got the microscope out and you're looking intently at someone, but then there's also the 30,000-foot level. And when we back up and look at some global understandings about who we are as people, who we are as institutions and the like, and your document absolutely presents that to us. And so it's a gratefully received gift for us. So we're grateful for that. Last week we talked about, or 2 weeks ago rather, the discoveries about the virus itself, and had walked through each of those components. And today, the next section of it is talking about discoveries of the individual. And so we're grateful that we have you, my friend, who serves as our acting general secretary for ABC USA, Reverend Dr. C. Jeff Woods, joining us. And again, just as a reminder to folks, we launched with this particular quote last week, and it really does kind of overview the perspective that we have in our time together. Man cannot discover new oceans unless he has the courage to lose sight of the shore. And in some ways, that's what we're asking you to do a little bit today in our time together, is to lose sight of the shore and look at some of the larger realities that we're confronted by. And so, brother, I am just grateful to have you with us, and grateful for the work that you've done in the presenting of the document that we're examining today, but also as well the leadership that you're going to provide. Who better than to hear from the author himself? So, Jeff, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Frank. Appreciate your leadership. I know that whenever there are opportunities for learning, for doing things better, for doing things differently for the sake of the kingdom, that you do that. And so I relish this opportunity also just to be a small part of what you're doing in the region. Discoveries for individuals, and we move into then the first one of these. Cognitive abilities are on overload. I continue to remember this. I was with a group of pastors a couple of months ago. It was early on in the onset of COVID-19, and this pastor, I love this illustration. You know, this pastor's spouse said, "Honey, can you please unplug the crock pot and then bring me back my tablet?" And halfway back, he realized, you know, he had unplugged the tablet and was bringing her the crock pot back. And, you know, there must be something wrong with that particular picture. Some of you may know this story, that I really had a baptism by fire in my early on. I was a youth minister, and you know, in college, right in my first semester of seminary, and just started to work part-time in this church. And you know, coming out of college was a statistics and management major, so that was no help, you know, at that point in terms of ministry. And I had my first baptism, wedding, funeral, and communion in 8 days after the pastor had a heart attack. And I'm standing there with a communion, and I picked up the communion rather than the bread first. And for several seconds, did not know what was wrong, you know, could not figure it out. And finally, you know, one of the deacons just, you know, leaned over and whispered and said, "I think you're supposed to pass the bread first," you know. And I'm not sure, you know, that I could have got there. You know, that's cognitive overload, you know, when clearly something is wrong, and we just can't do normal functioning because there's been so much coming at us where we've had to make lots of decisions, big decisions, deal with those kinds of changes. So the question then out of this that we pose to persons today is, how has this pandemic, COVID-19, affected your mental health?
And this would be the opportunity and the place where, if you feel comfortable unmuting yourself, you can certainly do so. If you want to place a comment in the chat box, that would be fine as well.
It's kind of a standing joke, but I have unmuted you all. Again, love that capacity. So please feel free to share kind of how this has influenced your mental health in the midst of the pandemic.
Well, I'll certainly speak.
I was going to say, I could get many witnesses to say that I was never very stable, but it really has. It's been a real dampening of everything, I guess. Kind of how it feels.
Pastor Doug, did you raise your hand? I'm sorry. Oh, you're muted.
I could raise my hand, but Space for Grace this week was a real balm for my spirit. And I appreciated the time and the reflection that was enabled in that. But the dissonance in my mind has just affected the way I think in so many different ways is hard to get my mind around. It seems like it just is.
Corey mentioned we're getting chipmunk feedback.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure where that's coming from. So
I try mute myself.
If somebody speaks, we can see. Maybe.
gotcha.
And Doug, you've used a favorite word of mine, but I don't know if you're willing to say more about dissonance.
It's not you, Mark. Yeah, it seems like things just aren't balanced. I'm finding that with the lack of face-to-face on a regular basis, folks are, I see grabs for power that I hadn't seen before. They don't know how to deal with things that they're facing, and so it kind of breaks down for them. That sense that we're hearing one thing, but we're getting a chipmunk underneath. I mean, I don't know if that makes sense or not, but that's kind of where I am right now.
Makes perfect sense. Yeah.
And it leads to not severe depression, but it leads to a day of depression a week or so.
When I would say, Doug, too, that the other challenge is at least there's a little more freedom to do this, but you when you have those feelings of depression, sometimes you say, well, I'll just get out and I'll go and I'll be with people, or I'll go, and you can't do that, especially for you where you're located. It's still challenging.
Right. So tomorrow I've scheduled most of the morning on the bicycle.
Good job. It's interesting. There's a pastor that I know who has had sobriety struggles and had 5 years of sobriety, and in the midst of the COVID pressure and coming off of Easter and no real break, lapsed in the midst of his sobriety, and actually recognized issues and checked himself into a psychiatric unit, knowing that at that point he thought his meds were out of balance. And maybe that's an extreme case, but I don't think we can underestimate just how much stress and pressure a lot of clergy are under. And oftentimes after Easter would have been a natural break, and the clergy that I've talked to, nobody took a break. Nobody took a breath after working through Holy Week online and Easter and all of that stuff, just powered through. And I continue to hear lots of pastoral leaders tell me they have no plans to take a break at this stage either, as they're getting ready for re-entry into face-to-face worship. So I think, whether we'll admit it or not, mental health issues are certainly staggering. And I don't know that we're finding good ways to deal with that. And I'm glad to hear you're going to take a break, Pastor Doug.
Yeah.
How are the rest of you finding time to breathe, or aren't you?
For me, it was, I guess, very significant. My husband took the whole COVID thing very, very hard. Very hard. And did almost nothing for weeks but sit in front of the turned off television screen. That was pretty hard on me. Just wondering what was going to happen, what was going to go on, and all like that. I backed off ministry a little bit, not like totally. I still did all my Sundays, but I tried to cut out everything extra that I could possibly cut out. And this is a praise. Finally shared it with the women in ministry, and they prayed. Within 24 hours, the weight was off of me, and within about 48 hours, he seemed to snap out of it. But it was a rough go.
Well, and you speak to, Eleanor, the fact that it's, from a pastor's perspective, it's not just the challenges that we face in ministry with the flock that God has called us to serve, but also the different layers with family and with friends, and all of that impacts who we are as people, right? And there you were, deeply concerned for Chuck and his own personal welfare. Sure. Oh.
I think, Pastor Jim, we learned who the chipmunk is, brother. If you could put your comment in the text box, chat box, we'll check it out.
So Jim is the chipmunk.
Or at least one of the chipmunks. So
not Alvin and the Chipmunks, Jim and the Chipmunks.
So I'm looking at the chats.
Yeah, Sue had said that another area of stress is now, you've trained one bucket of stress for another, now opening or not opening.
Yeah, we think about how difficult the decision was, for some early on to make that decision to close or to accept that decision. And I think few at that time would think that a more difficult one was coming down the road in terms of gathering back in our buildings. I mean, that's just this complicated nature of this virus, thinking, oh, okay, it got through that, now we're good, only to find that the next hurdle is higher than the last one.
What I'm saying is,
I appreciated Pastor Tim, lots of stress in our church about masks, no masks, temp checks, no temp checks, and how to put in chairs in the sanctuary and other issues. I think I saw Pastor Dave Parker is on the call. We had chatted earlier in the week. He mentioned that there was a real point of contention amongst the leadership about masks or no masks. And he actually, I think he told me, divided the sanctuary into a masks, no masks sections of the sanctuary to try to mitigate some of the tension amongst ardent supporters on either side of that. And I thought that was a pretty neat idea, was to divide the sanctuary itself so that it could accommodate both people in both camps.
Yeah, Mark, and to that issue, we actually took the step of our sanctuary is a mask-only space, but we've set up a remote video link to our multipurpose room, and that's the mask-optional space, so that we gave people the choice. But in order to do that, we had to utilize technology, and the concern there was, will the folks that are sitting in the multipurpose room feel disconnected or second class in some way? And was really gratified to hear this past Sunday was the first Sunday we were in person, and those that were in our multipurpose room felt like they were just as much a part of the service and just as much connected. But that was how we kind of landed on that, because we had a great debate in our congregation over that same issue of, should we wear the mask, should we not wear the mask? How do we deal with the fact that you got folks all over the spectrum, and how do you protect unity of the body in the midst of all this very, very divergent opinions?
Yeah, on Sunday morning we had a masks in the sanctuary and a secondary room that was going to live stream the service, but no masks. We had someone, very prominent member of the church, even though they had been told several times before through emails or whatever about that situation, they wanted to come in the sanctuary without a mask because that was the only way it was going to feel like worship to them. A couple people made a comment to them, nothing really harsh or anything, just asking them, and that person left the church in well, upset, I'll say. And it's Thursday. They're still stewing over that issue. So it is not an easy thing here.
And Corey also mentions in the chat box, be sure to reference insurance company guidance in the discussions. That may help to lend some credence to the policies that you put into place. But the challenge is, right, this is such an emotive issue and people are anxious anyway. And so it just lends it. And then Melody adds, do you sing or don't you sing in the service?
What have some done? Did you have congregational singing or not?
We did.
We did with masks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when someone's upset, during a worship service, there's not a lot can be done in that moment, but that follow-up is very important. And I hear you saying, it's Thursday and the person's still upset, but still just giving that person an opportunity to vent and say why they feel so deeply about this particular issue, sometimes can help, even when there's not a ready solution there. And maybe move on to the next slide. Yeah, I like that. That slide. I'm not sad. I'm not angry. I'm just recharging my batteries. I've often thought that ministry is often not fair to introverts, and in some ways, this feels like a period of time where it's not fair to extroverts. And just hitting us in different ways. Want to talk, I guess, about the accessibility that I don't know if you're experiencing that, but people know you're not, on the way to the hospital. You don't have another outside meeting, and it just feels like there's more pressure right now to be accessible or to respond immediately to people in terms of when people approach you online. I don't know how others feel, if that has increased.
I've certainly heard some pastors say that there's a level of guilt that they feel that they can't be available in the same way. So that gets back to the mental health issue, but it is around this availability and accessibility issue. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a little of both. Being overly available has been definitely an additional stressor, but one of the things that has added stress to my plate is that a lot of the touch point conversations and interactions and face-to-face opportunities were those Sunday morning or other in-person gatherings where in just a few moments you would be able to kind of touch base with several different people and be able to make them feel valued and heard and noticed, and now those opportunities aren't there, and so it's much more challenging to find ways to let those same folks feel like they've got a bit of the pastor's attention when there's a whole lot of people that would need a much more dedicated time frame of conversation or interaction or reaching out than just a quick little conversation in passing might have afforded.
Yeah, that's a great insight.
it seems like it's diminished a little. For a while, there were these back to back to back to back Zoom calls, sometimes 3, 4 in a row. Sometimes in a group setting, as people were off, larger organizations were offering help, and I wanted to participate in those calls, but also Zoom meetings with congregations and with other organizations. And I found Zoom to get to be pretty exhausting. I'm more energized in actual, I'm one of those extroverts, so face-to-face meetings were good. Zoom, it just began to feel as though I had little energy by the end of the day with all of the various Zoom online meetings. I don't know how the rest of you felt, but it's been nice to see that starting to dial back at least a little.
I said to my LLC this morning that I think that we should all bronze our earbuds so that we don't have to put them in our ears anymore.
Have some found appropriate ways just to say, I'm not available, set new types of boundaries working from home? Any insight into that?
I think for me, that's been kind of a challenge in the sense that having cell phone access now is kind of that point of contact rather than Sunday mornings. People have gotten kind of used to that. And so I'm finding now that I need to find a way to set a little better boundaries because that wasn't as much the case prior to not being in the building and having those connection points.
One of the biblical images that I really like is pruning. And I feel like, we are called to prune, because what happens, we talk about things being put on our plate, and, when it's full, the next thing that gets added is going to push off something. But pruning then is taking control of that, trying to say, okay, what are the things that are the most important, and prioritizing, and basically taking things off the plate or saying what's most important, so that doesn't just happen to us and we find, oh, I really needed to take care of that thing. I wish that didn't get pushed off. And so just to name something that may be extra work, as you return back. I know that we did a survey and found out that many ABC congregations want to continue their online, worship in some way, and do a hybrid, with physical and online presence. But that also sounds like double work to me, so, to think about what are some things that perhaps need to be let go, that haven't been clamored for as much, in order to respond to this new opportunity that does seem like a good opportunity to reach people.
Jeff, I would agree that it adds more to the plate by adding that dimension, because we were a congregation that had not yet had an online presence before all this hit. And it kind of forced us into that mode. We were already thinking and planning towards doing that, but had not really gotten there yet. And yes, we absolutely plan to continue that even as we now move back to a combination of in-person and online. And so in the interim, it has absolutely exponentially increased the workload, especially for my colleague here, who's our editor-in-chief of the online stuff and so forth. But one of the things that it presents an opportunity for is, as we move back into being able to have others involved, is to take some of that off of our plate and then say, can you help me with And I think that's kind of where we're beginning to be, because we're already reaching out to people to say, we're going to need some folks to, handle our camera and take care of that duty. And we need some folks to help with the editing and so forth to get it up online. We can't keep doing all that and move back into the role of being the in-person pastor and interacting with people. And so it really is an opportunity to expand that involvement in ministry and ask people to say, would you be willing to help with this new adventure that we're going into together?
I like that. And I mean, it just strikes me that, another learning from the survey is that the attendance has increased for many congregations, the online, attendance. And is there a way to say, if you've been worshiping with us and find yourself a new part of our congregation, we need your help, something like that, we would love to have you involved, just matching those two things. I like that's a way to take something off your plate, is to have another regular attendee take care of that piece.
I almost feel like at some point down the road, and I'm thinking a month at the most, it may actually be easier, because when it was only online, I had to do all the technology myself from home. And so I was preaching, and I was making sure Zoom was up, and I was making sure Facebook was up, and trying not to look too distracted or freak out because it wasn't working. Back in the church, I now have my wonderful 18-year-old doing most of the technology. We're still having some technology problems getting it all together, but I think once we master those, which I don't think will take all that much, then I think I'll feel like I don't have to worry about the technology. All I have to do is push the little PowerPoint button on the presenter, and I'll be fine. So I think it will get easier shortly.
Perhaps move to the next question, Mark. I was one that really doubted the ability to deepen relationships online. And yet I've seen where that truly has happened. Since the onset of the pandemic, the executive ministers and I have been having weekly conference calls, and it just seems like things have gotten better in terms of those relationships and the willingness to be vulnerable, the willingness to speak out and still respect one another. I wonder if others have comments on either worship experiences or small group experiences or any kind of online presence, ways that you benefited from that or found that you can use that.
Well, and as folks are thinking about that, Jeff, I'll just speak to the illustration used regarding the regional executives, and that is absolutely true. That's a group that doesn't get together very frequently in person, and so we spend all of our time getting to know one another, it seems, at the outset of our meeting before we can actually get down to constructive ministry work together. And these weekly conversations, even on Zoom, have been tremendously helpful to build bridges of relationship, to enable us to tackle some very challenging conversations around the passing of George Floyd and some of the experiences we're having as a culture right now. I don't think we could have had those conversations had it not been for that digital engagement with one another.
The importance of the digital communication and connection was highlighted for me this week in a note that came to one of my elders from a woman in the congregation who is homebound because of the dementia in her husband's life. And she wrote, "It's hard to talk with people on Zoom, but I am so thankful we have it. The other week, my daughter came when the service started, so I had to get up, and it was the week we were having communion. And I asked her if she wanted to join me in that. She said yes. I was so happy. It's been such a long time since we've shared that together. I'm just thankful for everything that's happening. I love seeing everyone at the service. It helps. I will be sad when it stops." Sally, it's not going to stop, though it will be a little bit different.
I've reconnected with people in the media community and throughout the country and throughout the world, and so yes, it allowed me to reconnect with some people that I hadn't had any kind of conversation with since high school. So.
Well, I know, Mark, for you, there was some real anxiety at the outset of all of this around tech. Yep. And that is lessened as it's gone along. And that's clear in your affect. I can see that.
Yep. Yep.
I would agree with Doug. One of my homebound people faithfully got into worship every Sunday while on Zoom, and one of the reasons that I want to continue it.
As you think about continuing it, are there different ways that you've thought about doing that?
Very tempted to move to, and this is where the technology struggle is, to YouTube, and possibly do it that way, maybe keeping or not keeping the Zoom, depending on accessibility. But I do want to keep some of it, and I think we're probably going to keep both.
And I don't know what ours is going to look like when we move, when we do come back together. We have worked for a very casual type service during this time. And how that's going to transition, I'm not sure what the format will be. We're still quite a ways away. Our restart team is working, but we're still quite a ways off.
I talked to someone this week who has been participating in worship from home and is not ready to go back. And the church building has been opened up and they've started worshiping again. And the comment was, I liked it better, when there was no one else in the sanctuary. It just seemed like it added more capability in terms of then creating the online worship. And then we just kind of explored for a little while, could that be done in a different way? I mean, some ministers practice their sermon, once before Sunday, could that be recorded, and then that still be the online rather than just, streaming live? Just because you're back live, doesn't necessarily mean that you just stream exactly what's happening on Sunday morning or Saturday night. Just to allow the different tools to lend themselves, to continuing to do things a different way. One of the pieces that I always did as a pastor, I cheated a little bit, and I always included something in the worship service called the background of the text. That gave me an extra, 3 or 4 minutes to set up the sermon. It was really probably should have been in the sermon, but I even wonder about something informal, like that, or some thoughts midweek that you're ruminating about, sharing some of that online, for people, just go ahead and recording that. I'm just thinking outside the box with you, today, thinking out loud. Maybe go to the next question. Resonated earlier with, persons saying, well, it didn't seem appropriate to take vacation, in the midst of this. There's nowhere to go. And now we're moving back, and now's not the time. And I just want to lift up, though, to say, consider just a day, though, for yourself, a day without conference calls, or, a day, a day off, even though you can't go and do something. I think still there is the importance of recognizing that grief is real, taking care of yourself. Andy Lester was taught pastoral counseling for me when I was in seminary, and I've used thousands of times his comment that whenever someone is grieving, fear and anger will almost always be present, and they'll almost always be present in an irrational way. That we're mad at something that just doesn't make any sense, or we're we're terrified of something that no one else is terrified of. So just when you see fear and anger surfacing, especially in ways that don't quite make sense to you, that's usually a sign that grief is there. And then, when grief is there, it's the process of getting in touch with the loss. If we, typically we are grieving something that we have lost, and the more specific we can be about naming that loss. Just those are thoughts that have been very important to me about grief over the years. But the question is, in what ways are you experiencing grief during this pandemic?
To back it up a second, I think the fear and anger are really the main emotions behind the mask, no mask. Which then would say dealing with it as grief might actually be a way to work through it over time.
It's also part of it, I think, Eleanor, of wanting things to go back the way they were, exactly the way they were, like the last 3 months haven't happened.
And that's loss.
Yes, exactly. It's not going to be that realization that it's never going to be like it was before. And as Jeff indicated, and maybe if it was, the whole experience would have been lost on us.
Yeah, we've had several people in our church say they're not going to come back to the church until it is what we had before, exactly what we had before. And it might might be a while before everything looks the same. And probably people in your churches too.
I was thinking too, so some of you know my mom passed away back on March 24th in the midst of the pandemic. My sister and I were able to be there at her bedside, but we were the only two family members that were allowed at the nursing home to be with her at the time of her passing. And we've been in conversation with the funeral director about trying to find a time to do a celebration of life. And it seems as though we keep pushing this further and further out. She's from originally from upstate New York, and there are restrictions. And so we keep pushing this thing further and further out. And grieving has really looked nothing like it would traditionally in our family, with getting together, talking about a person's life, celebrating that, having meals together. It's nothing like we normally would have gone through. And so I just think of all the people in your congregations who perhaps have lost loved ones, and grief has looked nothing like what would be normative in a family. And how do you as pastoral leaders help with that? Because even as early as a couple of days ago, I was back on the phone with a funeral director trying to figure out, could we do a celebration of life in August for my mom? So crazy, right?
I'm so sorry, Mark. I was not aware of that.
Thanks.
Sue sharing in the chat box her grief of not being able to visit with her mother who has dementia in Ohio. You know, there are those relationships, aren't there, that have been held at arm's length as well. I think there's grief over ministry initiatives that have had to be laid aside. For American Baptist women in this region, they had worked so hard in preparing for a conference, the men for a retreat. Mark McCallan referenced our biennial leadership conference, and it's even in the fall, and it's still changed. So all those ministry initiatives that have had to be laid aside.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
And I was thinking too, I think there was in Pastor Kevin's family, there was a loved one that passed away due to COVID. But I know, I think Pastor Melody, you just graduated recently from Fuller, couldn't attend that graduation celebration because of the pandemic. Just the number of people that have missed significant milestones as a result of this pandemic.
And the challenge becomes, as a pastor, what do you do to try to minister to them when you can't go be with them and give them the hug and sit there and listen?
Mm-hmm. Had the experience yesterday. West Shore is going to be opening this weekend for in-person worship, and they asked for a cleaning team to come in and do some deep cleaning of the facility. And also there was some construction that was done, some pretty major construction during the time of the pandemic that had already been planned. And so there was cleaning need to be done for that. And it was the first time my wife and I went and participated in that cleaning group. And it was the first time we'd seen some of these people. And just the pure excitement of being with these folks. I kidded with Pastor Kelly. I said, you do exist outside of your office as I see you on Zoom. That's good to know. It's good to know. So just the loss of, as you said, Eleanor, that physical experience of other people is deeply paining.
It was Tim Munson who was talking when he said, parishioner said, "I'm not coming back until things are the way they were." We've been talking about how things are likely never going to be the way they were, and kind of remembering that one of the stages of grief is denial, and could all the things about I don't have to wear a mask, or I don't need to do this, does that boil down to actually grief? And that's a reminder for me. I actually find a very daunting task, that I think there's a long road ahead of grief shepherding, because we quickly lost a world that's not coming back. Now we're eventually going to get control of this virus, maybe further into the future than we want. But there's going to be aspects of the previous world that aren't coming back. And this is going to be a kind of a long process of seeing this grief process kind of work through a lot of people over a long period of time. And that's a daunting calling for me. I don't know about anybody else, but I think I've been partially called to help people recognize and name what this is that they're dealing with, and deal with it as grief first, before we deal with it as resistance, or before we deal with it as ignorance, or whatever other word we might use for some of the things we encounter.
And around that, Corey, right? Everyone is different in how they process that grief, and so talking about trying to shepherd people through that process. Some are more malleable, some are more nimble around it. Others are going to be far more brittle with it, and seeking to be a spiritual leader that can help people work through that is going to be challenging. And so we're all feeling grief over having to help people process their grief, right?
I appreciated Corey's article that was shared. I forget what publication it was, when he talked about a little bit about lament and the need for that language. And been reading a book, Dark Clouds, Deep Mercy, and found it very helpful for me in kind of learning that language of lament for this time. And actually just started last night walking our congregation through an online Facebook Bible study in that process. I mean, I think that's going to be important for us as we shepherd our people, because it is a time that we need to learn that biblical language, because that's what we need to do at this time. We can't just pretend that things are going to go back to normal. We need to lament what we've lost and trust God even through this. So.
If there was ever a need for local pastors, experienced and gifted in pastoral care, to help people work through these issues, it's now, whether online or in person.
Yeah, the focus at the front side of this was all about skill sets around tech. Now the need is for skill sets around pastoral care.
Yeah, well said. I see Sue's comment, as well in the chat, that, there truly are opportunities in this. Just another thing to celebrate, and we'll be putting out the results of this survey that I've alluded to a couple of times, but I was so delighted to see in the results of that survey that there were more people that really talked about hope and resilience, than struggle at this point. And there was the same question that was asked about negative impact on items. And there were more people that said there are new opportunities in worship and discipleship, that were saying that it's negatively impacted those things. So that's just, evidence that even collectively, we don't know what, in my mind, we don't know how to get over the horizon, but it looks like there's some brightness, over there. That's all the further we can maybe say. But yeah, God knows how to use disruption, and there is grief when things change. There's grief over what's lost, but there's newness, and new every day. Nice slide.
Any final comments that folks would like to make related to the focus for the conversation we've had with Jeff today? Jim wrote, I think the truth of their spiritual state is coming to be revealed in some of his people. There is great truth to that too, Jim, isn't it? When we find ourselves tested, reality of our faith comes true.
I don't know how on topic this is, Frank, so pardon me, but I would encourage us to remember that home or in the sanctuary are not our only choices. We're in the middle of summer, and of course it can get hot too, but take advantage of outdoor opportunities. Scientists are saying that the risk is much lower outdoors, especially if you still kind of keep your distance, bring your own equipment. So while we're in this time of year, let's take advantage of that middle ground. Just a quick encouragement.
I know the Westgate Baptist Church in Lancaster has been having their worship as drive-in church. They have a parking lot and a pavilion that's right next to it, and it really is an idyllic setting for this. And they've had a wonderful experience. They've been meeting outdoors since Easter for worship, and the congregation voted on Sunday by a, words of the pastor, honk vote, right? That they're not going back inside. They want to stay in worship in their parking lot. And I said to Robert, when I was down last weekend to preach for him at this drive-in church, I said, are you considering doing this every summer? And he kind of looked at me funny, and I went, hey, why not? It's certainly having a great response. Their attendance has gone up. Their giving has gone up. It's been a great experience. So thanks, Corey, for lifting that up. Yeah. We've certainly had,
amen.
Yeah, and they did. It was really wild. But there is a sense in which, isn't it true, in the last 3 months, our church families have experienced a resiliency around new models of ministry that probably they've never had, and don't just kind of put an end to that, but be able to foster that in some other ways. I think that makes great sense.
Frank, I just want to say, I know that pastors are working so much harder than they were before, and then you add that uncertainty to it. So just take care of yourself, in this segment on the individual effects. Just somehow don't neglect yourself. We want you doing this for the long term, not the short term. So take care of yourself, and thank you for what you're doing, how you're ministering, for your presence with your worshipers and your community.
Well, Jeff, just let me say thank you for the gift of yourself today. Thank you for your pastor's heart that has come through during your devotion as well as your time with us. It's just so critically important for all of us to get to see you and our wider ABC leadership family in situations like this, because rather than being just a name on a page or a face on a website, you're a believer in Jesus that has gifts for ministry, and you've evidenced those today. So thank you, friend, for that. Greatly, greatly appreciate that.
You're welcome.
And I'm going to ask if you would to exercise that pastoral gift one more time and close us in prayer, if you would, friend.
Gracious God, we thank you for the amazing ways that we can gather that we never might have considered before. Gathering in nature, gathering online, gathering together, gathering with masks. It's still gathering, and we still gather in your name. Remind us of the promise that however we gather, wherever we gather, and whenever, that you are with us, that your presence is with us. There is so much uncertainty before us and around us, but we thank you that you are a God that thrives on that, that thrives on disruption and uncertainty. Forgive us, keep us from doing the same old thing when a new opportunity is right in front of us. It's not easy, but just help us to be able to do that, to expand your kingdom, to deepen the spirituality of your followers, and may it begin with us first as we strive to be closer to you and minister to our neighbor.
Yes.
In the name of Christ, amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you so much, friends, for taking the time to be with us this afternoon.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
All right. God bless you all. Bye-bye now.